Thank you. Appreciate the announcement. So at Mission Secure, we are considering ourselves an OT native cybersecurity company. And we're actually helping our customer and clients to deploy and run a zero trust architecture. So bringing them into a zero trust architecture. Over the years, we always had interest at level 0. And you hear a lot about this. Some people say it exists, it doesn't exist. So we started working on this for about like 8 years ago, and then we kept evolving it. So today I want to share a little bit our experience with level 0 technology, especially when it comes down to automatic recovery, which is really like the top-notch deployment of a level 0 technology. What's so fascinating about OT is that every environment is so different. I want to show you 2 environments that you say like, wow, I didn't even know that you can implement a cybersecurity technology on that. So here's the first one we're working on. Okay, got this one, thank you. This is a oil drilling platform that sits in the North Sea of Denmark, okay? There are very few people working on it. It's very hard to reach. If you want to deploy something, you have to find a helicopter that flies you out. Surprisingly, there's pretty good connectivity there. And it's a highly critical environment, so you're dealing with possible explosions, fire, oil leaks. It's a very sensitive, highly critical environment. Here's another one we have been working on, autonomous drones. These drones, they fly for weeks. Think about like this drone flying for 4 weeks in a row, executing a predefined flight path. So you avoid about like a GPS location, radar control. Obviously, in this particular vehicle, there is no staff on board, right? This is unmanned, and everything that's happening is happening remotely. Once in a while, this drone connects to a control center. So when you think about these environments, still, the zero trust architecture applies. You want to inspect as much as you can. You want to validate. You want to look at who is accessing it. How did they get to it? Which cloud where they came from? What's the network path? Which are the firewall configurations? Which protocol? How vulnerable are our workstations? What applications running on it? Who's logged in? And then what protocol? And which PLC are they connecting to? Is there a vulnerability on the PLC? And then what kind of like OT protocol are they using to program that PLC? And lastly, and this is what we're going to talk about, you can think about level 0. That's the idea too. You have a finger on the ground. You know what the actual outcome of your cyber physical process is going to be. And that is almost like too good to be true, because if you have that, why is not everyone doing it? And I want to shed some light on that one and walk you through like a scenario and a use case where it actually makes a lot of sense, and hopefully that drives a little bit interest for you to think about level 0 technology in the future. So here's another interesting case. When you think about it, who's actually really using it? First of all, what we, in our experience, and it must be, and there will be many other cases, it needs to be high criticality, high risk, like a sensitive nature, where the operator wants to go the extra mile to create like really the highest possible protection they can do. Then we see frequently it being used in where it's like restricted physical access, infrequent maintenance, and always the need for automate, something like that's somewhat remote. And then, lastly, relatively few clear performance indicators, some type of sensor, some kind of output that gives a clear status of the overall system health, okay, and the risk indicators. So here's another example. We have been working on an FSRU. Who knows what an FSRU is? Okay, this is a floating storage and regasification unit. So the vessel on the right-hand side is the FSRU. The one on the left-hand side is like a liquid natural gas tanker. It brings the liquid natural gas to the FSRU, unloads it, and the FSRU will then create gas out of it. Okay, makes sense? Yeah. So this FSRU only floats around, like travels like a few times a year maximum, and then the tankers come in many times a day or a week and deliver the liquid natural gas. The process for this application looks like this. Okay, on the left-hand side, you have the LNG tanker. That's that round thing with the round storage containers. An unloading arm comes in, pumps out the LNG minus 160 degrees Celsius into the LNG storage tank. Over there, it's contained, it's a bigger tank, and it will be collected, and then it will be pumped out into the LNG vaporizer. Over there, they're using seawater of roughly plus 13 degrees Celsius, and they warm up the LNG, and then it creates gas, and it gets into the pipeline and supplies the country with gas. So that's like the LNG type of scenario. Interestingly, with this scenario is there's two really big choke points on here on the surface. Now, one is the LNG storage tank, and the other one is the vaporizer. The LNG storage tank, we're worried about either exploding or imploding, so the level has to be perfect. Okay? And the vaporizer, we have the problem we're dealing with a low pressure scenario that goes into high pressure scenario. There's the potential risk there. Okay, now let's simplify this entire process and look at the tank. Okay, so we got a level meter, we got a valve and a pump, connects a typical OT system with workstations, a PLC, firewall, and then there is a VSAT connection depending on if the FSU is traveling or like a wireless ISP if it's audio on port, all right? So very, very simple, makes a lot of sense. Now, if you think about a potential attack, it would roughly look like this, okay? So somehow one of the workstations gets compromised. That could be spear phishing, could also be an insider attack, all right? Or a vulnerability that gets exploited. So workstation gets compromised, then the attacker attacks over the network, gets to the PLC, figures out how this thing works, and then reprograms some of our values. And in this particular case, doesn't have to be much. If it identifies the level meter as a level meter, it can potentially just change the range factor for the level meter. So then our gas tank would just overfill and possibly explode. So if successful and working for this for a long time, the attacker might have found a way to mask the condition and possibly even taking network offline when it comes to that. So we have to be worried about that. For sure, there will be some malicious activities and possibly a physical impact later on. So we got all of these three check marks here. We got the remote location. We have a sophisticated attacker that had a long time possibly to prepare, and we have the potential for catastrophic damage. So let's get the screwdrivers out now. Excited. Let's install a level 0 sensor, okay? So I have a picture here so you know it actually does exist. So on the left-hand side, you see the cyber signal integrity monitor. That's like a little device. It's probably about 8 inches big, and you can connect it straight to the signal. It has about 6 inputs, one for 20 milliamps, 5 volt, and 5 volts. So pretty much any sensor out there, you can connect to it. Most of the time, the sensors, they're already connected to the PLC, so you need to have like a signal splitter in between so that you can split the signal and then make that signal integrity sensor like a passive listening device to the actual physical signal, okay? How does it look in like a DIN rack? Here we go. I set this up and took a photo for you. So the signal integrity sensor is obviously connected to power. In this particular case, it's connected to a 24-volt signal. And then underneath is also an Ethernet port. It actually connects to the next switch. So that way it has access to the PLC and to a potential control console. And then on the right-hand side, you also see the signal splitters that we need. It was two inputs out and 2 inputs in and 4 inputs out. Okay? So this is set up. And then in our setup, it looks like this. On the bottom left, now you have the signal integrity sensor, and it's passively listening. It gets the input from the level meter, and then it reports status up to a console. In this particular case, our console is in the cloud, but it could also be on our vessel or somewhere else. It really doesn't matter that much. Most importantly, now you want to prepare for this. First of all, you need to understand what logics you have in place. You have the process logic in place, which is our normal PID, tank, pump, valve type of configuration. Then you always have the safety logic that runs on a different PLC right next to it, which is worrying about certain safety conditions, possibly a shut-off button. And then lastly, you want to consider what kind of logic do you need for cyber recovery, okay? This will be a logic that basically assumes that you can't trust any value and any input tag in the system anymore, and you want to reset that. This is a very powerful setup now. It basically means we have a finger on the ground, like an additional ear on the ground, a really third, completely independent way to listen to what's going on in the actual output of our cyber-physical system. All right. OK, good. So what happens now if there's an attack? Now, since we have our signal monitor in place and we configured it in a way that generally the operating window is between 20 and 60% of the level meter, and we configured in a way to trigger an alert when we're below 20 or when we're above 60, let's say 85. So we got the same attack again. Someone is coming over the workstation, goes over the network, finds the PLC, reprograms it, but this time we detected it, which is pretty good, right? Now we know something is wrong, and we can start some activities there. With this kind of thing, you have two choices. You can do either a manual or you can do an automatic response. And I'm telling you one thing. Manual response in the scenarios that I'm showed you before takes a very long time, all right? We're talking here about minutes, weeks, days, maybe even longer than that. The best way to handle it is some sort of like an automatic response, but it's really hard to do in this particular case. Now, the good thing is our signal integrity sensor is also connected to the PLC, so it has access to the PLC. So even if the attacker has removed our access from the network, we can still go and make changes to the PLC, all right? So 3 possible ways we can do, and I have graded them in amount of difficulty and risk, okay? So the first one is we can rewrite all of the input tags to a known good scenario. That's a really easy one, could work, all right, in some cases. We can also replace the input tags and also replace the program logic. That might be a really good idea because we can't trust anything anymore anyway. And the last one, assuming our PLC actually got compromised itself and there's maybe already running something else on it, we maybe have to reload the entire firmware and replace the program, okay? So for simplicity, let's really target the first scenario that is more realistic and actually has been proven for us in the field be more workable. So what we would do is we basically would take a snapshot of all of the input tags on a regular basis, let's say once a day. Once we then get the alert and we find out that the operating window, that the level meter is way outside the operating window, I'm going to take one of the sets of tags and replace it in my PLC with a set of known good tags, which then gets me, with a pretty good chance, to a much safer scenario and delays potential impact. Now, that seems to be pretty simple, and you can also manually snapshot this, by the way. It doesn't have to be automatically. We have done it many times manually, and that's pre-configured then in the integrity sensor when it gets written back to the PLC. So there's a few choices there. The problem with that method, though, is that you have underestimated the attacker, right? If we can write these signals back and the tags back in the system, the attacker can do this too. And I guarantee you that they will do that. Because they have worked on this for weeks. They probably bought access to that workstation on the darknet, and they brought some experts in there, so they have done some reconnaissance, so they know exactly what's going on. If we find a way to restore the system values, they will restore their system values as well. And we have tried that in the lab, and I'm telling you that's not pretty, working against the attacker basically in real time, all right? Plus, the attacker has a little bit of an advantage. They likely have already shut down network access, and so the signal integrity sensor works by itself and has an automated response. The attacker has more resources at that point of view. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to level this up a little bit here. So just having the signal integrity monitor by itself and looking at the values is really not good enough, okay? So we have to deploy a network security appliance, and this is here on the slide with the red logo. That appliance is really critical because it guards the input to the PLC and knows what traffic is coming in and what actually has been done in the past on our PLC. You could argue now, okay, that's an extra system that I need. How did we get to that, and why is it needed? Well, it is possibly already there. If you developed a really good zero trust architecture, you should have a security appliance at that point already there. To prevent lateral movement and north-south movements, you have to have something there. So this could be an existing industrial firewall or something very similar. Obviously, we have a device that we know that works and that also communicates with our signal integrity sensor really well. So now, in this particular case, what this network security appliance does, it keeps record of all access to the PLC, like SSH access, we see Modbus access, we see OEM protocols, FTP, and so on. So based on that, the signal integrity sensor can now signal to the network appliance that there is a problem on this particular system, and then we can auto-isolate the workstation that is basically creating the impact and auto-isolate that to a standby workstation. That way the attacker is taking off the system, and then we can start our auto-recovery process, okay? So now this one is obviously a one-to-many relationship. You will have one of these security appliances for hundreds of PLCs, okay? So it is, should be already there. There should be an API, and the signal integrity sensor can signal to it and then auto-isolate the workstation. So now, that one is a really good example where we understand now that just having level 0 detection is not really good enough. It needs to work together with the network. It needs to work with the protocols. We need to understand the access over time. If we don't have that, we can't protect the system. So really, we need to inspect what to expect, but we have to create a full zero trust architecture. It's not enough to have only level 0. And I think that's the biggest learning from this exercise is always look at as many input vectors as you can and build a full security posture. So in a punchline, what we learn from this is you can use level 0 detection technology that's actually very good. It's there. It's available. And use it where it makes sense. Use it where you know we have critical KPIs. We have critical state in our cyber-physical system. And then sample very few signals. Don't overdo it. Don't sample too many. All right? And then inspect not just level 0, create a full signal-to-cloud strategy and get as many input vectors as you can. And start small and expand where needed. Overall, always implement zero trust over time. Start now, lower the risk, and increase your safety. Thank you very much. So with that one, I would like to open it for questions. If you please walk up to the microphone, because that way everybody gets to hear it.
Hi, so I'm Andrei. So as far as I understood, your technology does work against insider threats as well, intentional and unintentional. So do you have cases of using your technology to manufacturing and food and beverage companies?
So I think your first question was like, does this apply also for insider attacks? Absolutely, yes. Actually, does really well. And the greatest thing about the level 0 technology, it will always raise when the problem happens, right? It doesn't matter how it happened. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a big use case, and it gets you a lot of confidence to having these extra sensors in place. And I think your question was, do you have applications for this beverage and manufacturing?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, we do. We have worked with manufacturing on that one, and it applies equally well. I use the maritime example here because it's kind of like, it's more like on the edge, but it depends on your use case and what you're trying to protect. And if you have these parameters, if you think you have something that is critical enough that you really want to double and triple protect, you absolutely can use this in manufacturing and similar applications.
Okay, let's talk later then.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was really interesting. And my question is, as I understand it from the monitor side, it's based or triggered on thresholds. What happens if those thresholds aren't actually breached in any way? I.e., say, I don't know, the 4 to 20 signal is frozen.
Yeah. Well, like, yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, The signal could be frozen. That would not be ideal. But assuming that the sensor is still working and it's frozen, then we will also not have a problem in our example, right? So the exposure can only happen if the level is above a safe or below a safe value. So it's all about the operating window. Are you inside or are you outside of the operating window?
But you could be pumping into the vessel, your level is frozen, and therefore you keep pumping, you have a flow.
Yeah. You obviously could deploy more sensors and then correlate, right? So in this particular, I made it very easy by only hooking it up with the level meter. We could hook up more sensors. We can do 6 with one box, or we can also deploy multiple boxes and then create a correlation between them.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Good. Any other questions? Well, I would say thank you so much, and I'll see you guys later down there at the lawn. Thank you.